Hello, welcome to Workshop 7 Curtain Wall. This is for assignment 4 skin, and this is the third video in a 4-part series. In the first video we did an overview of curtain walls. In the second video we looked at how to create custom mullion families, and in this one we'll be looking at how to create custom orthogonal curtain wall families. And then the final one we'll be looking at how to create custom pattern-based curtain wall families. So we have the example project we've been using all along here. I'm just section boxing in so that you can see one side of the project of the facade. And as I mentioned in the previous, in the first video, curtain walls are families in their own right. They're just a parametric family that stretches to fit within the grid in the overall curtain wall setup. So we'll start by creating our own curtain wall family. To do that, we go up to the Revit menu, and we go to New, Family, and we're going to select Curtain Wall Panel, not the curtain wall pattern-based. Do that later. And as I mentioned before, a curtain wall panel is basically a rectangular object that's width and height are set by the curtain wall grid itself. So we can't constrain width and height. That's important to keep in mind. If you try to constrain those, you're going to get errors. What we're going to create here is the entire curtain wall unit. So not a glass panel that sits within separate mullions. We're going to create the whole mullion, framing, and panel as one entire unit. So we'll start with the mullions. It's going to create a extrusion. You're going to see me doing this quite a lot. I'm going to lock the geometry of the extrusion to the reference planes. So as you can see, I have these reference planes here. I'm just going to make sure that the profile of my extrusion, whatever geometry I create, is locked to those reference planes so that it stretches with the grid of the curtain wall. So here we go, I'm creating the outer frame. Now I'll create the inner frame. And I'm going to want to constrain this too, because everything I don't constrain is going to end up kind of taking on a life of its own once I put it into the curtain wall. So I'm actually going to exit out and add some more reference planes. Reference planes are in the Create tab. So what we're doing here is we're laying out the width of the mullions, so the distance from the exterior. And I'm just going to add some dimensions to these reference planes. And now I'm just going to select my reference planes and then lock them to a width. So I'll make it 3 inches all around, except I'll make the base 6 inches. And then the last step is I'll lock my geometry. I'll lock my dimensions, and then I'll lock my geometry to those reference planes. Same thing, grab the shape handles. They'll snap to that reference plane, and then when it snaps, the lock pops up, lets me know that I can lock it. Then on this last one I'll show you, you can also use the Align tool. So the shortcut is AL, but it's also within Modify. There it is. And now, as you can tell, it's a little too thick. So I'm just going to select it, and then I'm going to change the extrusion end, which will give it an overall thickness. I'm going to make it 6 inches instead of a foot. And then I'm also going to want to give this a subcategory. Subcategory in this case will be panel. And the subcategories, so you understand that there's the curtain wall, panel, and door, and wall. Those have categories. But subcategories are when you expand those, they have their own visibility graphic settings. So if I go here to the main project, you can see I have those subcategories that I just chose from. So now if I turn off panels in that main project, it's going to turn off this geometry I just created. Next thing I'm going to do is create some glass. Same thing. Creating it, locking it to the inside, making it subcategory glass, giving it a thickness that is more what you'd expect from glass, make it 1 inch. Then we should also give these materials. So I'll change this to glass. And then I'll make the exterior, they don't really have the kind that I want here. So I'm going to have to go down to my lower menu here and choose something for the metals. There we go, I see zinc over here, so I'll click that. When I click it, I'm not actually selecting it, I'm just adding it to the menu. Oops, I'm just adding it to the menu, so now I have to pick it. So now that's zinc and glass. There you go. Now when I load this in, you'll see an error appear. That error is, oh yes, and of course we should give it a name, otherwise it gets some weird default name. We're going to call this cPanel Basic. There we go. And now when I load this in, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all my mullions, because we already have mullions inside the panel itself. But you're going to see an error pop up. Now I'll explain why that's happening in a minute. So I turn off all my mullions, now I'm going to select cPanel on the curtain panel here, cPanel Basic, and hit apply. Now there's that error. It's asking me if I want to delete my mullions. Yes, I do. And there it is, my mullions are gone, and now my new curtain panel mullions are in place. And you can see that even in different curtain wall settings, I maintain that relationship of a thicker base, a 6-inch base in this case, with 3-inch top and bottom, even when that curtain wall has been changed. So now that you've seen me do this with a basic panel, we're going to try something a little more complicated. I'm going to add in excuse me, a couple more panels to the individual panel itself, a couple more mullion divisions. I'm going to fast forward through this next piece. You've already seen me do a lot of this before. The process is basically what I just went through. So I'm going to be creating reference planes, locking those reference planes with dimensions, and then I'm going back in, editing the extrusion I created before, and just locking that extrusion to the new reference planes that I've set up. What you'll notice when I make this more complicated is that I'm going to load it in and you'll see an error. The error is basically, since I'm locking my bottom mullion here, that small panel on the bottom, to be 2 feet high, you'll notice that when I load this into the project, here we go, load. So I'll get an error that's going to tell me that my cPanel Basic isn't going to work everywhere because of the different curtain wall settings I have. So the first thing is, you'll notice it's whited out here on the left. That's because those panels are too small. They're less than 2 feet. They're not going to accommodate the geometry that I've created. Now in this case, you can just hit delete type and you're fine, and then replace panels just replaces it with this generic mullion-free panel. But you can see that my other panels came in just fine. And that not only that, but they've stretched. So the relationships of the 2-foot small window at the bottom, still there. If I change these relationships, for instance, if I make the spacing 15 feet, you'll see that the whole thing now stretches. So that center mullion stays in the mullion, the lower mullion stays at 2 feet, the edges stay at 6 inches on the bottom, 3 inches, etc., etc. Now I'll show you what happens when we apply this to a curtain system. So I'm going to open up my curtain system, I'm going to create a new type. Same thing as before, I'm going to turn off the mullions, and I'm going to change the curtain panel to be my cPanel Basic. Now, same error, it's asking me to, it's telling me that it can't make the type. Now what we're looking at is right along the edges here, because we designed a rectangular curtain panel, and our edges are triangles, sometimes they're trapezoids, sometimes they have 3 different elements. So we're going to say yes, and then delete panel. Didn't get rid of my mullions for some reason, but that's fine. I mean, this lets you see that the mullions and the panels can exist at the same time, even if we do put mullions in there. So, as I mentioned, since we only designed a rectangular panel, it's just not going to figure out how to apply that panel to this corner. There's a couple of things we could do. One, we could actually design kind of little custom in-place families that we put there. 2, we could try to resolve it with a pattern-based curtain wall, but even in that situation, your pattern-based curtain walls are going to have a similar issue to this. They're not going to know what to do with the seams. I think if it's possible to not spend too much time on this part of your project, I would probably define a seam that's critical to you, but leave the rest unattended. Because once again, this is Revit really forcing you to think about how the building is put together. In this last piece, we can continue to add more detail to this. It doesn't have to, I mean, we can really add as much as we want. Let's create a little sun shading device. So I'm going to move through this pretty quickly, but I mean, I'm just creating another extrusion. So I'll start with a very simple extrusion, just a basic triangle. And I'm going to get rid of that little edge because probably going to cause me troubles down the road. Same thing, just locking it to the reference planes. There we go. Little adjustment, trim it up. And then now I'm just going to lock the edges of the extrusion so that it stretches with my curtain panel. So I'm just locking it to the outside reference planes. Just one, using the align tool. Now let's load this in and see how it looks. So there you go. Now we can continue to get more complex with this. So if I made this, for instance, the kind of shading device, what these typically are, consists of a series of rods. You can just keep beefing up the detail. Now, what's going to support those rods? I can add in some side pieces. I'm fast forwarding again, just to make this simple, just to make this video short.